Okay, so let's talk about some of the design issues associated with support for abstraction in programming languages. So first, let's define some terms. So encapsulation deals with how we are able to group together related code or related data. This includes things like headers from C or packages from Java or structs or classes. Um, this deals a lot with the concept of modularity and readability, extensibility, maintainability. We'll also talk about information hiding, which is the question of whether underlying data can be exposed, whether it is hidden. There are different levels of this that you're familiar with from Java, like public and private and protected. There are different notions about whether or not you can access members as fields or whether you have to go through getters and setter methods. Um, and this deals with a lot of issues like convenience and writability, and a lot of times these are trade-off versus safety and extensibility. The more you hide data, the safer things generally are, but it can cause inconveniences when trying to access that data. Polymorphism is the question about how parameterizable can you write a program. So how easy is it to swap out types and things like that. So there are issues of specifying parameters, specifying restrictions on those parameters, and here the trade-off is often between power and expressivity versus readability. So there are a lot of advantages to encapsulation that you should have encountered in 159, such as better organization, separate compilation, avoiding name collisions between different parts of your program. So let's distinguish between a couple of different kinds of encapsulation. So we'll talk about physical versus logical encapsulation. So in physical encapsulation, code is contiguous. It's contained in one unit, usually in a single file, versus logical encapsulation, where things are kind of linked potentially across multiple files. There's naming encapsulation versus non-naming encapsulation. So can you reference things by that unit of encapsulation? And then there is grouping only versus information hiding encapsulation. So is everything public? You're just grouping it because it's being grouped, or are you actually grouping it in order to make some of the things inside of that group private? So here's kind of a nice table that was originally put together by Dr. Fox that kind of summarizes some of the things that you may be familiar with in terms of whether they are physical versus logical encapsulation, and then whether they sort of fall into naming or non-naming, and then whether they fall into grouping only versus information hiding. And you'll notice here that things can appear in multiple places here. So for instance, you can have a Java class, or you could have a Ruby class. So you have classes in both of those languages. They both provide naming-based encapsulation because you have to access things using the name of the class. But in Java, you have to put the whole class in one file, whereas in Ruby, as we saw in the project that we did, P4, I believe, we can separate the definition of a class into multiple files. And so that's why the Java class is a physical naming encapsulation, whereas a Ruby class is a logical naming encapsulation. And so you can look at all of these various things and see where they fall in the table, and hopefully hopefully everything makes sense. But if not, of course, ask questions on Piazza.